Welcome to our members and guests to this SDIS monthly Zoom talk. For people who are not members, please note that SDIS is an 80-member, 40-plus-year-old organization dedicated to the life of the mind in a social setting. And in addition to monthly talks, we have a number of study groups in various areas of human knowledge and culture. And you can discover SDIS on our website, sdscholars.org. So it's just SD, San Diego, scholars.org. And it's filled with all kinds of information about our activities and so on. Before introducing today's speaker, let me give you a heads up on coming talks. On January 21st, we're going to have Jesse Driscoll, a professor of political science in the Global School of Policy and Strategy at UCSD, give us another look at, a different kind of look at Ukraine, Russia, and the war. And on February 18th, our speaker is Ahmed Abdullah, who's a fellow of the School of Global Policy and Strategy, but also an assistant professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering at Carleton University. And he's going to talk to us about reducing the carbon footprint and the role of nuclear fission, or lack thereof, in that equation. So our speaker today is John Ignatius Rigoli. His experiences as both a cradle Catholic and a former U.S. naval officer who served in Vietnam informed his worldview in a rather unexpected manner, opening his eyes to the proposition that those who seek power are the last people who should hold it. John is an unabashed social justice advocate, outspoken liberal, and a patriot, and he sees no dichotomy in this. As a talented and inquisitive amateur historian, John became interested in the stories of the earliest women in the church and how they have been erased. Though a work of historical fiction, the Vatican Chronicles takes its inspiration from the real women throughout history who toiled unacknowledged alongside their brothers. John has written 3 historical fiction books, 2 audiobooks, and 2 children's books on Amazon. John, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again. A real pleasure. I really appreciate your giving me the opportunity to share some of my information that I hope you'll find interesting. I'm going to immediately switch over here to a full screen. Okay. And let me see here. File, whoops. Let's see here. I thought I was able to do this. Oh, here we are. Okay, I think I got this. This presentation is a brief summary, but I think I've condensed it pretty well about women in the early Christian church. I hope you can hear. Can you all hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks to the work of contemporary archaeologists, literary scholars, we have compelling evidence that women held leadership and ministerial roles in the early church by inscriptions and images found on papyri, tombstones, frescoes, mosaics show early Christian women serving their communities as apostles, bishops, priests, and deacons. They discovered at least 100 tombstones for female deacons that survive today, and later I'll show you a map about that. Leading experts estimate that a total number of female deacons were in the thousands. These inscriptional testaments demonstrate the power, unequivocal status of women deacons and presbyters within an emerging Christianity in the first centuries, well into the medieval period. This is an example of one of those tombstones. This is an inscription of Sophia, the deacon in Jerusalem. As you can see, this is what the tombstone, a drawing of it, would look like. This is a transcription of it. And in English, it says, "Here lies the minister and bride of Christ, Sophia, the deacon. Second Phoebe, she fell asleep in peace on the 21st of the month of March. In Diction 11, the Lord God." And like I said, there's well over 100 of these that are still around and hopefully preserved. I got a lot of my information from the Biblical Archaeological Review, which lists the latest findings in archaeology. It's a magazine that connects the academic world of archaeology to the broad general audience seeking to understand the world of the Bible in the Near East and the Middle East. I've been reading this book, this journal. They come out about every 3 months, and I've been reading it for about almost 40 years. This is one of the first frescoes showing women dressed as priests in the Priscilla catacombs of Rome, dated around 240 AD. This is another one showing a woman wearing vestments worn by priests while saying Mass. The woman on the right, dressed in white robe, that is the robe of a bishop. And over on the left, there's another woman who is reading the scrolls and teaching. A lot of people are not as familiar with the fact that there were women scribes. This is a picture of a woman scribe from a mural on the wall of a home in Pompeii. In the first 3 centuries of the church, there were no churches, and the members went into people's homes. And guess who led the services? Women. And there for 2 reasons. One, in the first couple of 200 years, men were afraid and not accepted Christianity because it was against their pagan religion. And as you know, there were a lot of persecutions of Christians. But women, they were mostly not persecuted, and they were the ones who had their gatherings in their homes. But it doesn't show here, but in many of these homes, there were 2 altars. There was an altar for the man for his pagan gods. And because every morning he would go and pray to his pagan gods before he went off. But then on once a week, usually back then, the women would hold these services for early Christians. This is a 9th century mosaic located within the Church of St. Priestess in Rome. It shows women wearing the vestments of deacons. I want to take note, though, of this one on the left. This is Theodora Episcopa, the feminine form for bishop, written above her head. If I could point it out here, it's not easy to see. And also on her robe, there are 2 emblems showing that she was an ordained priest. And the square around her head indicates that she was alive while she was a bishop. This is a general area of Galilee, and I bring this out to put into perspective the geography of some of the areas that I'll show. And here is one of the main cities that we will talk about. Here's Capernaum, here's Magdala, here's Nazareth, and a very important city, but it's not listed in the Bible, but was made a capital of Galilee back at that time, and it was called Sepphoris. It's down over here. And the reason I wanted to show this is because a lot of the activity in rebuilding Sepphoris to a major city was by the help of many people who lived in the area. And the other interesting factor here is there were little trees in the area. So all the construction and the building of Sepphoris was done in stone because that was the major material that they had available for building. This is a reproduction of what Sepphoris looked at back then. And this is the excavation that they started about 30 years ago. And in the Bible, the term tekton describes Yahshua's father occupation as a day laborer and a handyman. They would have done work by which many of the people in the surrounding villages to work in Sepphoris, and so it became a fairly large town or capital actually of Galilee. I think there were about 30,000 people that lived there compared to many of the villages like Nazareth, which only had maybe a few hundred people, which is only about 4 miles northwest from Sepphoris. And Nazareth, of course, is believed to be the birthplace of the mother of Yahshua. One of the notable structures is this Roman theater and over 60 mosaics from the 3rd century. And this is one that starts off with a woman. This is at the summit of the theater in Sepphoris is a large dining room floor around the 3rd century. And this is a beautiful woman in the mosaic. And today she is known as the Mona Lisa of Galilee. This is an example of where recent archaeologists, and they discovered a 1st century home that they regard as very probable through legend and stories, that this was the house of Mary, the mother of Yahshua. And this is what it looked like back then. And this is the remains today, which was basically made of mortar and stone walls and was cut into rocky hills. This is another example of a very 1st century house at the time of Christ on a property next to the Church of the Annunciation. The Antiquities Authority described it as the very first residential building from this old Jewish village. It's a very small house consisting of 2 rooms and a courtyard with a cistern to collect water. Next is they discovered recently 2 synagogues in the city of Magdala. And at that time, the city of Magdala was a very large fishing community with about 30,000 people. And as in history, Mary Magdalene was the disciple of Yahshua. And according to the gospel, and this is very important, she, and this is just one of many examples, she financially aided him in Galilee. Women were the people who financed all the early Christian teachers. You remember, many of them quit their profession, their jobs. How did they get the money to go around and travel and preach? And that was true. Many women, and in this case here, Mary Magdalene, historically they believe she was one of the major contributors to that early movement. And this is in her hometown. Her Hebrew name was Miriam of Magdala. In one of those synagogues, there's a famous stone called the Magdala stone. And it bears one of the earliest images of the seven-branched menorah. It is a stone block with symbols of the Temple of Jerusalem, with the core of the temple represented, and the hall and the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. And it's about 2 feet by 1.8 feet. And it was found in the center of this synagogue. And the Magdala stone is believed to be a piece of ceremonial furniture on which the Torah and other sacred scrolls were placed. This is the octagonal remains of the Byzantine church over, and this is another point, of Peter's mother-in-law's house in Capernaum. Again, Peter, and like the other disciples, they quit their work. So where did he live? He lived in his mother-in-law's house. There's another example of how a woman is important to the early church. Beneath the foundation of this church in Capernaum, they found many archaeological discoveries where Yahshua first started his ministry. How did the early Christians spread the word? Yahshua's message of equality appealed to the poor and women. These two groups made up most of the new converts to Christianity. And how did that occur? Well, Roman roads, here's an example of one, and due to the fact that at that time there was the Pax Romana, there was peace throughout the Roman Empire, and that helped the spread of Christianity. Many Romans feared the spread of Christianity because Christian ideas did not agree with the old Roman ways. Here's an example, and I'm going to read some of these. Paul wrote in his Romans 16, personal greetings of some very special women. Number one is, I commend to you the sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church in Cenchreae. I ask you to receive the Lord in a way worthy of his people, to give her any help she may need, for she has been the benefactor. Again, showing women supporting the early church of many people, including him. How did he get his money to go and travel? Greet Priscilla and Aquila, her co-authors in Christ, risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful to them. And greet also them that meets where? In their house. Greet Mary, who worked very hard for you. And Andronicus and Junia, Jews who have been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles. They were with him. And then greet Tryphena and Tryphosa, those women who work hard in the Lord. Greet my dear friend, other women who work very hard in the Lord. This is one of the few places where women are actually identified and recognized in the very early first century. In the second century, Clement of Alexandria wrote, the apostles were accompanied on their missionary journeys by women who were not married partners, but colleagues, that they might be their fellow ministers in dealing with housewives. It was through them that the Lord's teaching penetrates the women's quarters without any scandal being aroused. We also know directions about women deacons, which are given by Paul in his letter to Timothy. Was this the role of Junia? She was mentioned by Paul in Romans 16 as among the apostles. Some have debated the meaning of this verse, but a tradition holds that Junia was a woman and was considered an apostle. Till the Middle Ages, the identity of Junia as a female apostle was unquestioned, but later translators attempted to change the gender by changing her name to the masculine Junius, but such a name is unknown in antiquity. There is absolutely no literary evidence of that a male name. This is a picture in a church of Saint Junia and listed as an apostle. This is an old map, not complete, of the ancient world, considered were at that time women, it was shameful to mention women's name, but Christianity changed that. And many references to women in public ministries. We have learned about some ordained women from these tombstones or burials and mosaics and frescoes, but only a few wealthy women could afford to have the ability to make their tombstone or a fresco or a mosaic. Christianity was particularly a religion of the poor and slaves and the oppressed. But many of them were ordained equally, and even though they couldn't pay for works of art, not all ordained people had their titles on their tombstones. There's many in the area of Tunisia. There are many inscriptions from the area of Christian Carthage, where there is mention of clerical titles, and we know we have manuscripts that clergy were named there. Known women architects are far too known women deacons are far too numerous to include in this map. Each reference on this map has been published, studied repeatedly by scholars. The older views that women received clerical titles only through marriage with a cleric, and that women were ordained only in heretical sects, are no longer tenable. It is time for Catholic teaching at every level to include the available information about women, ordained and unordained in the early church. And I'll just kind of scroll around here a little, where it shows down here, Phoebe as a deacon around 50 AD. And then if you get a chance, we could just do a couple of places where there was a bishop up here in the 552 in Lyon, France, and another one over here in 500. And here's a bishop in Theodora in 820 AD, and then numerous priests listed in different times. And again, like they say, this is just a partial map of what really was there. And then finally, I have this, I couldn't possibly cover and give full credit to the number of women in early Christianity. So I put together, or I found these references by women scholars. And these are books that really get into books about the study of Mary of Magdala, the struggle for authority. Here's one, Women Leaders in the Ancient Synagogue. And these two are really very popular. I think her name is Ute Eisen. Women Office Holders in the Early Church, Christianity. And this other woman, Dorothy Irvin. Archaeology of Women's Traditional Ministries in the church from 100 to 820 AD. And then there's many others of women and Christian origin. And here's one from Gary Macy, very popular, The Hidden History of Women's Ordination. Another one by Madigan, Ordained Women in the Early Church. And then here's another one by Mary Ann Rossi on recovering women priests of early Christianity. And a few more I'll just read off. Women's ministry in the early church, women in the New Testament, women when women were priests, And here's the final one, Phyllis Zagano, Holy Saturday, an argument for the restoration of female diaconates in the Catholic Church. And so I thought I'd just give you an idea of how much biblical scholars and historians have discovered about women in the early church. I think I'm going to close out here if I can do this and get out of here. Oops, I don't know if I did something wrong here. Oops.
At the very top of your Zoom screen, you'll see a red area. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So now we'll begin the question period, and we do this generally with the raise hand function, which if we will find if you have a PC, you will find at your bottom of the screen, it will look like a little raised hand. Or if you have an iPad, it may be at the top of your screen. I'm not sure. Anyway, and what will happen is you click that raise hand, as I'll do right now, that says that I have a hand raised. If you look at the participants, and you'll see a raised hand right up at the top of the screen by my head. So if any of the rest of you want to ask a question, you can do the same thing. So I guess my question would be, what is the attitude of the current church leaders about these records? Is there anything been written on that much?
The church does not recognize any of this, and any reference to women being of high office in the church. They, like I read there, they say that woman was given that title because she was married to a bishop or whatever, and was only about 20 years ago when John Paul wrote a letter, and he unequivocally said only men were allowed to be the disciples and to be priests. And that was just up until 20 years ago.
Alvin Halpern has his hand up, and then Julia Stroud has her hand up.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, you showed a number of these mosaics or paintings or whatever. And when you look at the faces, you can't always tell if it's a woman or a man. So I assume there are identifiers in the paintings themselves that they're women. Is that how it works?
Alvin, how they identify them is their clothing. Just like today, if you saw someone in a suit, a man, you could pretty much say, or priests. They wear the robes and garbs of priests. Those mosaics, they are identified by the face. They know it's a woman, and the garb tells them. Well, like in that one, it shows a woman who's dressed in a white robe, and the white robe was the way bishops dressed in white robe like that, and that's how they identified them, by their dress.
Julia's hand is up next.
So I'm most interested in following up on similar to Dorothy's question, in that you've been researching this for decades, and I'm interested. You mentioned that John Paul said that only women are allowed to be priests, and that was a current commentary, not on the historical findings. Was that, or was it both? Did he say in the past, no, they haven't been priests, and currently, no, they can't be priests? Or was that current commentary? And what's the momentum been? I mean, the zeitgeist is different now. So can you just sort of let us in on what's happening now?
Yes, that letter was written about, I can't remember, it was around 20 years ago. And he specifically wanted to put to rest that there were ever any
Wow.
women priests, and only,
Wow.
and very specifically said only men could be priests. And that was, and today, the Vatican and the church, their position is that is the position of the church, and that's why John Paul wanted to bring it up to date, because there's been a lot of pressure over the years from a lot of these historians showing, but by mosaics and frescoes and tombstones, that there were women priests. And the thing that really, I hate to say this, it aggravates me, is women for the first 3 centuries, they were the ones who made the church. They were the ones who had house churches. They were the ones who supported all the disciples. I mean, and then to just after the 3rd century, when Constantine came in, then they threw all that out. And then it was from then on, only men were, even though up until around the 5th century, there were many parts of Europe where there were some bishops that were women and priests and deacons. But slowly over time, the church had it, disappear. And like I think Alvin said earlier before, it's amazing how today we think this is the way it always was, but it wasn't that way.
So how do they discount all this recent scientific, or they just say it's fake news? I mean, you know what I mean? How do they discount the more precise dating and of all these findings?
A lot of times, like I said, they will say, well, like that mosaic with Theodora, where
Right.
very specifically says Episcopa. But what they say is, oh no, she was honorarily honored with that name because her husband was the bishop. Well, why is she wearing the robe? It signifies that she was ordained, and that why would a general's wife, and they would put the name over her tombstone, and they would say this general's wife was also a general. I mean, it's just very poor rationale by the church to not acknowledge women as being office holders in the church.
The next hand up is Dave Barker.
Hey, Dave.
Unmute yourself, Dave. Unmute yourself.
You can unmute, yeah. Hi, John. Well, I was wondering along those same lines. There must be many scholars who have commented on this now and published all kinds of material. And of course, the church is very stubborn, of course, on these things, but it remains, and many of the people who commentary on this are professional archaeologists and so on, and know what they're talking about. And is there any other commentary in the church about it by any sort of contrarians in the church? There must be, aren't there?
Of course, there are many people who don't follow what the church has been claiming. Well, we know through records and history that priests were married up until around I think it was around the 12th century.
Yes.
Church doesn't want to acknowledge that because they decided they didn't want if a spouse of a priest and the priest died, they didn't want the spouse to have inheritance of the land. So they eliminated back then the ability for priests to marry. And another big example is the church enforces celibacy. Well, but we know that probably 30 or 40% of priests do not practice celibacy. So, or here's a more modern example. The church says they are against birth control. It's against the church's belief. Yet, what percentage of women, Catholics, practice birth control? It's way over 90%. So yes, there are contrarians, but unfortunately the church, they have the power to dictate what they want to dictate.
The next hand up is Faye Gersh.
Hi.
I think
When you talk about Christian, are you just talking about Catholic? Because when the church is divided or whatever they did, the Protestants certainly don't have this prohibition, or do they?
Many religions, Christian religions, they did have this problem. But the Greek Orthodox Church, which was founded at the same time as the Roman Church, they had priests that were allowed to marry. So, and they've been around for 2,000 years. In other religions, early Christianity, there were a lot of different Christian groups, but it didn't came about until probably, I guess, someone could correct me, but really it wasn't until Martin Luther, when he broke away from the church and then broke away some of the major Christian divisions of the church to other Christian groups. But in fact, most other churches, even the Jewish religion, have women rabbis. And that's one of the reasons why it's still very annoying and frustrating that many Christian religions have women who are priests, bishops. And in fact, there was a big breakup in one of the big group churches when they allowed I think it was a woman to be a bishop, and then that group split up about 10, 15 years ago because one group did not want to have women be allowed to be a bishop.
I thought it was because that bishop was gay.
And it might have been that bishop was gay and that church split up. Another rule that, because most other religions, Jewish and in many other Christian groups, they allow gays to be leaders in their church.
Another thing that's interesting to me is the people that seem to be holding what remains of the church together are women who very nicely, devoutly go and pray every Sunday or whatever they do. And men hardly come at all. Am I right about that?
You're absolutely right. And not only are they the majority, quite a large majority of those who attend the services, but the majority of the money that the church gets is from women, and just like it was back then.
Whatever.
I know
It's hard to make out what the Catholic Church is trying to preserve anyway. It puzzles me. And I think this Pope should be much more progressive along those lines, shouldn't he?
He is, but you have to remember, he's dominated by a curia made up of a number of cardinals.
Yeah.
And many of those cardinals are very, very old men.
Yeah, he's gotten away with amazing amounts since,
And
anyway,
he-
yeah.
Right.
Joan Casale's hand is up. Unmute yourself, Joan.
I'm sorry.
I said Joan's hand is up and she has to unmute herself.
Oh,
Look for a little microphone, a red microphone with a line through it on your screen, Joan.
Or press the space bar.
Oh, hold the space bar down. That's all you need to do. Hold the space bar down, Joan.
Oh, temper unlimited, okay.
There you go. Hold the space bar down. You have to hold it down.
Oh, I have to hold it down. Okay, well, the church with the all-male leadership for a long time, they take a position that they are morally superior to women, which is absurd because men, men are most of the criminal class. You have all these sex scandals in the church where the priests were molesting the altar boys and anybody else they could get their hands on. So it's so pathetically hypocritical, and they're just pathetic, and they're not a good example.
Here we go.
No. And of course, the church is falling off in attendance and people going into the priesthood. I have a friend who, this is probably 20, 30 years ago, she told me that, guys went into the seminary and they very quickly dropped out. And, most of the priests are old and getting older and they just don't have a new stream coming in. And so they're going to die out pretty much.
That's correct. And one of the reasons it inspired me to write the first book, The Mystery of Julia Episcopa, was briefly because I had met a couple of women at a seminar. Both of them had their theology master's degree. And when they went back to their church, the priest, one of them, he yelled at the woman in front of other parishioners that only women were allowed to talk about theology. And the other one was a nun. And she went back to her convent, and they told her after she got her master's degree in theology, she was not allowed to talk about theology. And that just really, really inspired me to write Julia.
Mike Seidel has his hand up.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, in the Middle Ages, the only people that were educated, that could read Latin, that could write contracts and laws were monks. And monks, all since Benedict already, were of course celibate. And so they were very welcome amongst all the powerful people in society as advisors and helpers in everything other than warfare. And therefore, they were very happy with the idea that these people that were very essential for the state, that they didn't have wives and children and could possibly in the next generation decide that they would have more power than their father had. And so therefore the idea that educated people, priests, bishops, etc., have to be celibate was a very welcome kind of thing for society and the people powerful in society. Nowadays, of course, that particular feature is no more interesting, and so therefore the change would be very painless unless the church, of course, is very worried about having precedent, making laws that would proliferate and show that the church hierarchy had made mistakes that were needed to be cleaned up and changed. So I think that's all. That's not a very powerful. There's no biblical, as of course this particular lecture shows. There was no biblical or early church reason for celibate in most priests, but I think even in the early or medieval church, somebody wanted to be a bishop, just like in the Eastern Church today now, he would have to be celibate, and while by ordinary priests didn't have to be, but in order to become a bishop, you have to be celibate, because bishops had powerful positions in society, and the people in charge of society were not interested in having bishops proliferate and making demands on the state because their old man had been a bishop. So that's understandable, and it fits perfectly with the practices of the Eastern Church. I mean, the Orthodox Church. I don't know. I mean, in Bavaria, where I grew up, the priest, the village priest, had a farm, and the farm was keeping the priest alive. There was the income from the farm was what the church, nobody else, no collecting or no laws gave the priest an income, except he had this farm that belonged to the church, and therefore it worked very well. Even the village priest was celibate, and of course there were jokes about it. They were saying that the grown sons of the priest would be running the farm, but that was probably an exception rather than the rule.
Who knows?
What about I think probably the position of women in the Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox Church was about the same of the Roman Church, but I'm not sure. Does anyone know?
Yes, you're right.
Well, and until 1054, when the split occurred, the churches had the same rules and regulations, and they only diverged after the split between the Western Roman Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Only after that you can talk about something different. Or before that, it was the same. Nobody knew any different. That's it.
Yeah, I do that. I was thinking about
Christianity
it.
was that what was Eastern or Western version, but they were not considered different until they split on political reasons. There were no change in the beliefs and the biblical grounding of what they were preaching was identical.
Right. They did no longer wanted to report to Pope in Rome, so they had their own patriarch for that. But let me interject. I'm probably going to give it a little bit away, but as far as priests being celibate, I think that's a very understatement. I'm writing on my third book, which will be out next year. And there were articles written in the Boston Globe and in the New York Times about the number of women that have children from priests. And there's an international organization of children from priests. And a lot of people aren't aware, but there are many, many, many thousands of children of priests. And during the Middle Ages, there was a number of popes who were married and have children. So I mean, to indicate that the priests were celibate, I don't think I don't think people are really aware of how misleading that saying is.
Sue Carberry has her hand up.
Well, I grew up in the Byzantine Catholic Church, and someone had just chatted about the Roman Church and the Orthodox Church being interchangeable. I wonder if they're thinking about the Byzantine Catholic Church, which is similar to the Orthodox Church in that they both used the vernacular of the locals. But the Byzantine Catholic Church is Old Church Slavonic, and the Greek Orthodox Church tends to use Greek. And the Byzantine Catholic Church, yes, could be interchangeable with the Roman Catholic Church, because my parents were one of each, and they were both considered under the Pope. And so while some of the ways of conducting the church service were different, but they were still under the Pope, and therefore one could go to the other. And when I was a child, the priest was married and had children, and priests were allowed to be married early on. Well, after that, the priests were not married, so I don't know what was passed or what. But say 50 years ago or more, the priests were still married, still having families in the Byzantine Catholic Church.
Yeah, actually, the Roman Catholic Church recognizes the Russian Orthodox, your Byzantine, the Orthodox. So they consider themselves under the Pope and recognized by the Pope. So
This is the Byzantine Catholic Church,
correct.
not the Orthodox Church, not the
Correct.
one
I understand.
that late.
Yes, that it is recognized by the Pope, and they recognize the Pope as being their titular head. I wanted to add one more thing. My own father-in-law was a deacon in the Catholic Church, married with my husband's the baby of 7 children. So there were plenty of children. But when he became a deacon, and he's long gone now, he would have become a deacon around 1970. And my mother-in-law lived much longer than him, but the papers were signed that if my mother-in-law had passed away, that from then on he would remain celibate. So the church is still trying to enforce that. On the other hand, my in-laws used to laugh because it was quite clear that one of the pastors in one of the churches in San Diego County, I'm not going to name it, it was quite clear that he had 2 children because, well, for one thing, the children came to stay with him every summer when they weren't in school, and then they'd go back to the couple that essentially agreed that they were their children. And it just so happened that the priest had a very specific feature to his face. So it was quite clear that the children were really his. So they had somehow developed their own way of of ignoring what was supposed to be one of the main tenets of his priesthood.
Well, just to give you an idea, that organization, Children for Priests, there were over 50,000 50,000 children of priests who have signed for support in that organization. But let me throw in one more thing that I think is kind of funny. An Episcopalian married priest with children can be taken in to the Catholic Church and remain married with children. So it's been my contention, well, why can't an unmarried Catholic priest become an Episcopalian priest, get married and have children, and then be brought back to the Catholic Church as married with children?
Interesting concept. A little convoluted.
Bad enough, John, that priest could be married. I mean, the guy could be married and then have, after 7 children, have a marriage annulled. And the whole thing is too ridiculous.
So
You
how
came
we
to the
doing?
wrong place if you wanted some believers, I think.
Never rational. Church is not rational.
No, it's not.
Are humans rational?
No, well, priest and pope, they're all human. So we could say.
By the way,
Oh,
may
that-
I interject about the Pope? He really is a progressive, and I'm sure that he would be pushing much more. He's lived in a much more real world than most of the recent popes. So he is now allowing
Divorce?
quote, for health reasons, that condoms can be used during sex. So I find that from my perspective, it looks like he's trying to push the envelope beyond what's been going on for a long time.
Say nothing of the fact that Italy has one of the lowest birth rates in the world.
Well, I used to teach at University of San Diego, and when I started teaching, I would ask this, and I teach population studies. So I would ask my students how many siblings they had. And I happened to teach a group, it was a joke because there was the Tons family, 2 brothers married to 2 sisters, both dentists. Each of them had 12 children. So between the 2, there were 24 Tons kids. So I saw a lot of Tons kids at least in the earlier days of my teaching. By the time I left USD in 2003 or 2004, the average when I'd ask them to raise their hands was 3 children. So I would guess that most American, a good proportion of American Catholics are just ignoring the business about birth control.
Well, I came from
Okay.
I came from a large immigrant Italian family, and I had 25 first cousins.
Wow.
So I know, but now all of my,
Don Bamber's hand is up.
oh, go ahead.
I'm trying to remember, isn't there an early Christian book titled The Acts of Paul and Thecla that tells about Thecla, who was a female co-missionary with Paul?
I'm not familiar with it.
Mhm.
It sounds very, very good, very interesting.
Could you tell us more about that, Don? Do you know more?
I only have a vague recollection, but I seem to recall reading that according to this book, Paul and Thecla traveled about together for a period and were missionaries.
The problem I read, though, is that Thecla, they have very little evidence of her. And so, like a lot of early stories, they are somewhat, well, they're stories. And the little bit that I know about her is that they're not even sure that she really existed. And that's from my, but there's a lot of books and a lot of stories, and well, just like the miracles and a lot of other stories, they're myths, and that's what I know of Thecla. I don't know if Paul, he traveled with Timothy and some other men, as far as I know. He did have women, as I read, where some of them were in prison with him because they were in prison when he was in prison. But as far as I know, I don't ever recall reading where any women traveled with him other than Timothy and some of the other people that are documented.
Well, it would seem to show, even if she didn't exist, that someone thought that it was useful for political purposes within the church to claim that she existed.
Well, just like I was saying in one of the pieces there, the disciples had women travel with them that were not their wives, and the reason they did that was so that the women could go in to preach at the women quarters because the men couldn't go in there, and it's fairly documented that the early disciples traveled with a lot of women because the women had to do a lot of the basic household things while they traveled. They would do the cooking. They would prepare the meals. They would do a lot of the typical female work, and they went around in a large group, and many of them were women. But unfortunately, historians or the church just does not account for them, even though there's a lot of historical evidence that they did exist.
Faye Gersh has her hand up.
Does the church forbid homosexuality? I mean, is that still being abstinent?
Oh, absolutely. They, well, guess who pushed so much against Roe v. Wade was the Catholic Church.
Oh, yes, and our 7 Catholic priests on the Supreme Court, yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, yeah, that's a big.
Well, that was Roe versus Wade. I'm talking about, I mean, gay sex is not sex, is it? I don't know. I don't know.
And gays are not accepted in the church.
No, I guess not. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So only a few heterosexual relationships are accepted.
And Carol Ziegler has her hand up again. Unmute, Carol.
Yeah, actually, the church accepts the reality that as statistics show that about 10% of people are homosexual, but the church forbids them to act out their sexuality. And so they do recognize that some people are different, but they're not allowed to be different, I guess is the way to say it.
Yes, I've heard that they like you say, they're there, but they're not allowed to practice their their
proclivities,
sexuality.
Sue has her hand up.
I came in the middle of the discussion, so I'm not sure if anyone brought up in San Diego the fact of the woman who has her own congregation and says mass here in San Diego.
Yeah, what about them?
Yeah, tell us more.
I haven't heard lately, but I know that she was very active, and I did go a couple of times to her mass, and they had a wonderful presentation, shall I say, of the sacraments. And I know that she was in discussion with local priests, and some of them were more favorable to her, but of course the bishop never was. And I want to say her name was something like began with a J, but I really haven't heard anything for a while. And I can't help wondering, or if anyone else knows anything, what's happened.
Yes, I don't know about that particular lady, but there are unauthorized women that have been ordained priests, but the church does not the Catholic Church does not recognize them. And there's a number of groups in different areas, in different places, and in the United States, where they claim through a bishop that they were ordained, but the Catholic Church won't recognize them. And and they're still very active, and they go under different names. I'm not sure of one of the names. I don't want to say it because I might be wrong, but there it's a group, and and there's documentaries and the numbers of them that I've seen and heard about.
So there's nothing to stop a person to act as a priest and set up a congregation.
Right, that's right.
Hmm.
And the
Go
only
to hell, I think. we should.
That's amazing.
I'm sorry.
Would there be punishment in the hereafter?
Oh, well, that's just
John Bamber has his hand up.
I was wondering what the status of women was in the Eastern Roman Empire during the early years of Christianity, because if you read about the status of women in a few centuries earlier, several centuries earlier in classical Athens, they were treated worse than women in Saudi Arabia today.
I'm not familiar with that. I can't comment on it. I'm not familiar with the treatment of women other than in the Catholic Church since the Pope and the cardinals in the last 1,000 years or more have they really treat women as, well, second-class citizens. And it really doesn't make sense to me, like someone said earlier. The majority of attendees at church are women. The majority of people that contribute to the church are women, and yet they are treated with no ability to be office holders or of any position of authority.
Make the coffee.
So.
Joan has her hand up. Unmute yourself, Joan.
Yeah, you have to click on the little red thing there, the left
The
corner.
little red, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Now you're,
Okay,
Yeah, well,
okay, on this question about women in leadership or women morally, have moral authority. If you look across different cultures, whatever, it's the men who are leading the pack in the criminal class. I mean, men are the ones who do the wars, kill people, but slaughtering thousands. The criminals, and men are running the system. And there's very few women criminals by comparison, and the men have the upper hand in that. But yet they complain they are morally superior to women. That's that's total bullshit. And I say bull, mindfully bullshit. Yes.
wow.
I'm thinking that maybe all of the pious women in the church ought to just start going to a church that's run by a woman priest and contribute all their money there.
Yeah.
And that might be a very interesting transition in the church, as suddenly all of its money was going to this other source. It might suddenly motivate it to change its principles.
Maybe Jesus would have a sex change operation.
Okay, now Sue Punjak asked a question about the woman priest who was around several years ago. As I remember, she repented and said it was all a mistake and went back to the fold.
Oh,
Really?
no.
Yeah,
I didn't hear
there
that.
was one, I can't remember her name, but there was one who did that.
Yeah.
Dave Parker has his hand up.
I gotta go.
when Dorothy and I lived in Wisconsin, I worked in the criminal justice system as a psychologist, and it was interesting to me at that time in Wisconsin. This we were there in started there in 1971 and stayed there for 26 years. The number of incarcerated women were in one particular prison. All of the incarcerated women in the entire state of Wisconsin were held in this one prison, and it went from maximum security to medium to minimum. They were all right there, no matter, there were several murders, of course, and so on, and all mixed in together. Now, the men's prison system couldn't possibly do that because they had so many people. And the women in there were, the amount of women incarcerated in the entire state were about 300. And they were in this one prison. And at the same time, how many men were incarcerated? 3,000.
Mhm.
Gives you an example of how true it is. That, and I'm sure that now they say because of various factors, the women are catching up a little bit, but very close to about 10 to 1. And that remains true as far as I know. But
Alvin has his hand up.
Yeah, I guess my sense is that in any Orthodox religion, that the fact that it's women who go to the church doesn't mean that these are the women who are the ones who want to change it. Just the opposite. In other words, many women buy into the orthodoxy of the religion in which they are, and they accept it, and they like it, and they're angry with people from the outside who say you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, or you should acknowledge this or acknowledge that. So it's not that all women have, quote, an enlightened view of things. I think many women, the ones particularly who go to church, probably feel very differently. Probably feel very strongly that the male hierarchy is precisely the right thing.
We can be our own worst enemy. I agree. Bummer.
Mike Seidel has his hand up.
Oh, well, I was worried there for a moment that possibly the difficulty nowadays of giving women official functions in the church has to do with what one would call the Ginny Thomas effect, namely that people are worried that the wives exert an undue influence on the husbands, and the husband is really the one that has the job, and his husband is the one that has to take the fall if things go wrong. So you don't want to have a Ginny Thomas in the background pulling the strings. I don't know how much that is, but it's a possibility.
Joan Cassell has her hand up.
Yeah, only men who are not henpecked should apply to be priests.
All right, on women and power and responsibility. Women are vetted by evolution in a way that men are not. If a woman has a child and she is violent and irresponsible, it's likely the child does not survive. And that has, so we just, and also women are very cooperative, because when you have a child, when you give birth, you're exhausted and you need help. And particularly if you've had other children, you need somebody to take care of those little toddlers while you take care of your little baby. So you're used to working with other women, helping each other. we have that unique experience, which the men do not. We give birth and we cooperate with other women who have given birth. And that really vets us for cooperation and being sensible in a lot of ways that the men are not. We don't start wars.
Well,
We've been going on for an hour and a half now. Are there lots of more questions, or should we begin to start thinking about thanking John for an interesting talk and everybody for an interesting discussion, and go on our ways to enjoy the rest of the weekend?
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I certainly would like to thank you, John. You
yes.
got us started
Thank you,
on a
John.
lot of things here.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful.
Great.
As
Very
before,
enlightening. Very enlightening.
interesting, enlightening. That would be a good way to, exactly. Stimulating.
Thanks. Thank you.
Right.
And thank you, everybody, for coming, and all of you, your wonderful enthusiasm about discussing topics and so on. And John, who is one of our new members, incidentally. So welcome to the fold. So anyway, if there are no more questions, thank you, John. And
Are we ever going to meet in person again?
Okay, good.
oh yeah, why don't you tell us about, are we ever going to meet in person again? That's a good
Right.
question.
We're thinking about it, but COVID seems to still have its little tentacles out there, and possibly this
Okay.
winter.
All right, I'll wait.
Okay.
The next meeting is in January.
January. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Well,
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.